it's like you fall off a cliff of financing options. And all of a sudden you're stringing together bank loans.
That startup probably won't work anyway, but like...
Okay, then that's on them. Like, then move on to the next.
That was a job that you had to do. How did you feel? And how did you start?
You're really calm. You want to be affiliated with that. And then underneath, you're like...
The recent science has come out and said choice fatigue might not be a real psychological phenomenon.
The strongest impact that we can leave on the brick and mortar industry is if we can create a universal cost standard.
Hey, welcome to episode 3 of 3 Course Founders, where we have deeper conversations with entrepreneurs who are building the future. And today we are chatting with my friend, Neha Govindraj. She is the founder of Bonside. It's a startup building an alternative financing platform tailor-made for brick-and-mortar businesses. In other words, they are an alternative capital solution for businesses with 4 walls who are looking to expand, open new locations, and grow their bottom line. It's all built on the notion of what they've called the repeatable revenue agreement, where the access to this capital comes not with an interest rate, but instead performance-based payback. In other words, it can scale with the income of that business, and given how variable brick-and-mortar businesses can be, the payback being flexible is a huge upgrade over legacy solutions like a traditional loan. They collect a percentage of monthly revenues until repayment is achieved, and on the other side, they fund these deals by bringing on outside investors who are interested in this asset class. And so for folks looking for alternative investment or fascinated by brick and mortar, Bonside is an ecosystem and a platform by which they can actually meet and support these businesses. We're going to have 3 courses of fantastic conversation over food and coffee. The first course about her unique market insights learned along the way. The second course, mutual founder therapy over the hard parts of building a startup. And the third course about Neha's unique strengths and weaknesses as viewed by her founder friends. As a reminder, I'm Sherveen. I'm the founder and CEO of venture-backed free agency, so I'm in the weeds with these founders myself. I'm an occasional angel investor, and more than anything, a true startup nerd who loves having these deep conversations with my fellow builders. If you have not already, I'll encourage you to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, Pocket Cast, wherever you're listening or watching this thing. Your support means everything. We release a new episode of 3 Course Founders every week. With that, I hope you enjoyed the show. Neha Govindraj of Bonside, welcome to 3 Course Founders.
Thank you.
So excited to have a conversation with you. And as we do, we're going to go through 3 courses, 3 topics. You know, the interesting thing that I always, when I first learned about your business and then met you and always think about is just like the comparisons that people in venture and tech will immediately make.
Yeah.
Which is there's a bunch of startups over the past hype cycle that are all seeming to struggle mostly because I think they're not in the reality of like brick and mortar, but in fake SaaS land.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think some of them are doing better than others. I think CapChase is doing well. Pipe seems to be going through some struggle, but these are all alternative financing companies that essentially, you know, to summarize, do some sort of, hey, you know, you are a SaaS business with predictable revenue, subscriptions. We'll give your company cents on the dollar ahead of expected ARR as a method of giving you non-dilutive capital. And so if you're you know, building productivity software, you can go to a pipe, and whether that sort of company has either a marketplace of investors or themselves is going to give you dollar, then you know, you get to sell essentially ahead of your accounts receivable. Invoice factoring of a kind. And you're bringing that essentially to this brick and mortar services businesses. Complicate that for me. What's it's such an obvious idea in some ways. What's the essence of it? You know, both in terms of how you guys think from a mission perspective and then how it's become practical.
Yeah. So I'll start on the mission side. So the thought here was, if you are a brick and mortar owner with multiple locations, your multi-unit concept, you have a strong, stable business on your hands. You've got multiple locations, very high likelihood that each of them are profitable, and then you're operating probably a pretty lean corporate overhead, and therefore your entire business as a whole is profitable. However, it's not producing enough cash flows to go and open your next door. And so what are your options? You've got 3 locations, they're all doing really great. You want to go open that 4th door, but you don't have the cash flow to actually go and put $500,000 into a build out. And today it's almost like, you know, when you're a tech business and you've got venture capital available to you, you're like up here, right? And then as soon as you're like, okay, I want to go open my 4th door, I'm not using venture capital for that. It's like you fall off a cliff of financing options. And all of a sudden you're stringing together bank loans, which by the way, haven't been iterated on in the past like century, merchant cash advances, which maybe are going to cover like a 1/5 of your build out, if that, or, you know, equipment leasing and some shark loans and things like that, which most of these businesses are asset light. So you're sort of just looking at a string of not great financing.
Right.
And so even if you could pull a little bit of financing from those, you're still down here. You're not getting like halo effects for like hiring and PR and like all the great stuff that venture really powerfully brings to tech. And so the question was, well, how can we provide financing to these really strong businesses, but not just provide financing, also provide the stability and the support that venture capital has so beautifully provided to tech. And so the way we actually went about that was we said, okay, if you've got 3 locations that are producing revenue and they have consistently produced revenue, you have data that shows that. You're now plugged into a point of sale system, an accounting system. It's not pen and paper anymore. So can we leverage that to say, okay, it's pretty likely that you're going to continue to do this for another 3 years. And if we take a percentage of that revenue over the next 3 years, in exchange for that, can we give you capital upfront today to go deploy that build out? And by the way, if you deploy that build out, you successfully open it, that's going to go towards the 3%. And that's how we get rewarded in the end too. So that way it's win-win.
Right. Incentive aligned.
Exactly. So yeah, so that was the mission. And then that was how we actually put it into practice. And since we've launched, it's just such an intuitive way for business owners to scale. And I it's so funny when I started Bonside, it was really from a place of intuition of, I know that this worked for me. And so I want to bring this to everyone. I didn't even know what to call it. And so it's now, obviously, I'm so deeply in the industry and I'm like, oh, revenue-based financing is like the root of all this. I didn't know that was a term. So I didn't know what to Google. I was like, revenue share, upfront payment.
You were like, there's some way in which I want to share in the future upside of this. And so give me something today. And that must exist. Well, to your point, it doesn't exist in ways like when you talk about people having to get loans, they drop off the venture capital cliff, or they're forced onto venture capital if they're the type of founder who has access to that and they accidentally go, I should take this because I have access. Now they're a different business.
Totally.
It is this really great point, but your fundamental job as Bonside now becomes to underwrite, right? Is to really decide to understand these businesses, because I'm going to guess that it's what I'm sure this is still a figurative number in your head, not yet something you know the number on, but is it 1 to 5% of brick and mortar services businesses that you think would in the next few years be relevant? And maybe it eventually scales where you guys are able to go to wow, we came up with multiple models and tiers, and it's a lot of businesses. But right now you have to underwrite to ones where you go, actually, this shared upside incentive, revenue-based stuff will actually reward Bonside and your investors.
I would say that we sort of protected our approval rate in a way by saying we are focused on brick and mortar services. And so we really shrunk kind of who we're going after. And so within brick and mortar services, which by the way is a massive industry, if you think about all the different services types of businesses, when you look at just brick and mortar services and we're saying, hey, you need to be profitable, most of them are. Most of them are facilitating profitable locations.
If they're not, they're going to shut down. They're not even going to get to you.
Totally. And then we say, okay, you need to be corporate. You have to be in a good cash position, or your corporate profitability needs to be there. A lot of businesses actually get approved for our financing of the ones that we meet. Now, when they don't get approved, it's very clear why. There is no oh, you didn't fit into our thesis, or we just weren't feeling it. It's hey, this is the part that's showing up red. So if you can improve this over the next 3 months.
Talk about that. So what is showing up red in that case? So you're going into that business. How do they give you access so that you can properly underwrite them? What are you looking at?
Yeah. So we ask for access to their point of sale system, access to their accounting system, and then there's a couple of confirmatory pieces as well related to banking and payroll. But those are the 2 key ones. And then we essentially have our kind of proprietary underwriting model that we run them through. And essentially there's a number of metrics that you need to be green on in order to get financing from us. Some of those metrics include, what does your 4-wall EBITDA look like by location? What does labor as a percentage of sales look like by location? What does corporate EBITDA look like? What does customer loyalty look like?
And then, to think about this whole picture of you getting access to all this data, this is something you and I have talked about your business that I find so fascinating. Talking about the data angle here, right? I found when you first told me about Bonside, one of the things that just I kept asking about once you revealed it to me is just the fact that you're getting such rich access to point of sale, to QuickBooks, all of these things that in some of these businesses are just messy. And in some ways you're helping standardize how these businesses should think about that data, how they should, do reconciliation in their accounting process, which when you talked about it, I found it obvious when you were talking about how, they just don't, for example, categorize expenses properly at all. And this is things that you begin to basically give the business almost like a crash course in how to, I don't want to say like properly run, but a little bit properly run, or at least for a sense of scalability so that you guys feel comfortable in investing in the future.
Most businesses are managing their costs in some way. Mm-hmm. It's just that it's not standardized from business to business.
Right.
And so it makes it really difficult for a bank, let's say, to actually effectively underwrite because they can't just use one underwriting model, ingest all the standardized data and be like, green, green, red, red, green, red, green. Instead, it's like, no, I have to sit down with each business, learn their cost structure, and then I have to decide. And that's just way too much effort. So they're just like, nope, I'm just not going to do it. And so what we're coming in and saying is, hey, while we're underwriting, rather than tailoring our underwriting model to every business, we're going to tailor every business to our underwriting model. And in turn, over time, we actually want to provide that back to the businesses so that we can say, hey, here's a standardized way to manage your costs. And here are tools to help make that a far more of an easier process. Because ultimately, like the strongest impact that we can leave on the brick and mortar industry is if we can create a universal cost standard of how businesses should be managing costs. And we have no right to call every business up today and tell them they should be managing it this way. Like, says who? Why you guys? Like, no, I'm not going to trust you. I don't want to buy your software. But if we're underwriting for financing, which is such a key thing, so important, we're going to take their data really seriously. We're going to be really thoughtful in what the cost structure should look like. And really the reason you want uniform cost structure is so that you can be well financed. You can have good exit opportunities. You can really like set your business up for success. And so if we're leveraging financing to ingest this data and determine the universal cost standard, then when we ultimately ship it, there's a lot more credibility behind it of, hey, this is based off of diligence and financing. This is based off of like using this standardized approach to achieve success.
The first time you shared that moment with me, I remember telling you that like it really resonated because, for example, for agency, we're a venture-backed startup, Series A. There's a lot to manage. So we have an outsourced accounting firm who emails me constantly trying to get me to do the proper things when it comes to anything related to our finances. And I ignore their emails. And it's because, to your point, there's not money at the other side of doing it properly. Right. I mean, there's proper process and operations for our business, but there's not literal financing. And so I'm going to ignore, even though I pay them to do the work they're attempting to do in handling our accounting, handling our finances, handling our projections. And yet, because the incentive isn't there for me, I do it because I know I need to somewhat, but I'm not doing it diligently. And I just love that about what you're creating, the incentive alignment in so many ways. Let's switch lenses for a sec to give us the industry insight of someone who's, Bonside is a fintech company. You're in a little bit of this brick and mortar space. You're a little bit in lending or alternative finance. What's an industry insight that's at the basis of your work?
We exclusively partner with brick and mortar businesses that provide a service. So really that equates to beauty and wellness, which includes boutique fitness, food and beverage, and then what we call clinician care. So anything that's providing a service in a clinic-like setting. Our underlying belief is that brick and mortar as an industry, and more specifically brick and mortar services, is really underserved and underestimated. I think when people think of brick and mortar, or more broadly, small businesses, you think of a very certain type of business. So at the start of this conversation, if I ask you, what do you think of when I say brick and mortar? Let me ask you.
Yeah. Laundromat, fast food. Oh man, I can't even think of other things. It's so difficult.
Right.
Clothing stores.
Okay.
That's all grocery.
Yeah. And that's where, I think people think of those concepts, and a lot of those, might not have really strong margins, might not have big footprints, massive top line. And so people are just sort of writing off
franchises.
The industry. Right. And so our belief is when you actually walk outside today, the world looks a little bit different in terms of brick and mortar. You're seeing a modern facial concept. You're seeing a modern nail bar. You're seeing a healthy, fast casual spot. You're seeing the future Sweetgreens of the world, the future One Medicals. It's really this new wave of brick and mortar that's really emerging. And even the operators behind them are just a higher caliber of operators than I think most people expect when they think brick and mortar. And so our insight is this is growing and it's not going to stop. If there's one thing that's true, it's since the beginning of time, retail, brick and mortar, commerce, it has all existed and it's only evolved. And so our belief is it's going to continue to evolve. We're at the really, really early innings of something. If we can come in and be the ones to actually back the growth of this industry, there's a huge road ahead for us to actually watch this industry grow and be a part of that growth with.
One of the things I really like about that, and we'll get into how Bonside in particular does support that growth. But you said the word evolve, which I think is important because a lot of people might, if they're hearing you and going, they've got an objection in their head, it probably sounds like something, but what about the growth of e-commerce? What about the growth of online, right? And I think we saw with the pandemic, and Shopify was actually the one that put out the chart, the CEO put out the chart that showed actually it was truly a COVID-induced growth trend line where basically like the adoption cycle of e-commerce went right back down to its former trend line, still growing, but all of that COVID stuff was a period in time.
Yeah.
So that's why I like the word evolve, because there's change in it. You're talking about a new type or new type of operator. You're talking about these new modes, which I'm assuming you think, and tell me what you do think here. You're not saying online isn't still coming for a lot of this stuff. You're just saying it's going through an evolution, and that evolution is going to continue to mean that some segment of retail and brick and mortar will be ever present in our lives and is going to figure out how to continue to fit in our lives. Is that your take? And what do you think about the critique or the counter trend point that would be, well, eventually e-commerce eats it all?
For sure. This is where I really focus and hone in on our specificity of brick and mortar services. Right. So we actually don't even play that game.
Right.
We don't work with clothing stores. We don't work with beverage stores. And not because we believe, Amazon is the future. I think there's certainly a roadmap that's brick and mortar focused there. But there's a lot of unknowns in that, and that's not risk that we're underwriting today.
Right. And you're talking about, when you even say beverage, like I think you guys do beverage, but you do beverage services. You don't do consumer packaged goods.
Correct. So we won't do like a liquor store.
Right.
But we'll do a coffee shop.
Right.
Because our belief is
experience.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what
and
we're
service.
bullish on.
It's the people also operating. Right.
Yeah.
Another thing you and I have talked about in the past to bring to this conversation is this idea that like a lot of founders who traditionally would start a SaaS business or like try to discover something venture backable should consider actually building brick and mortar.
Yeah.
And you'd probably point to a lot of these examples as look at the success that can be created. Is starting, by getting a storefront in your local neighborhood something that a YC prototype founder should be doing more often?
I won't tell someone what to do. And if you want to be a YC founder and you want to go start the next Google, go for it. You've got the ambition to do that. You want to do it. You should totally do what you want. But if you're looking to do something that will transpire into something, you want to create something, put it out into the world, you want to see results from that within a year time frame, you want to be able to do that in a way that doesn't require a heavy capital intensive investment upfront. Yeah, 100%. And we're seeing that happen way more often. You're seeing a lot more folks. I mean, take even brick and mortar services out of the equation. I would love to see like a Twitter trend chart on how much are people talking about laundromats all of a sudden, and parking garages and vending machines. I think there's just this like increased fascination with, small businesses aren't so small. They're actually pretty big, particularly when you're the 100% owner of that business. Right. And I think there was definitely a class of founders that likely got a little bit dazzled by venture capital and was like, I want to be a VC-backed founder, but didn't want to build anything. Like, you just wanted to be a founder and you wanted to call yourself a founder. And, I think we're out of that phase, fortunately. But I think for a lot of those people, it's like, hey, actually really ask the question, if you want to build a venture-backed startup, go for it. But do you need to build a venture-backed startup? And
then, the other thing about that they might be thinking, or that, again, this class of entrepreneurs isn't emphasizing, is this concept of how, to your point, it's faster, that feedback loop to revenue. You're at a storefront, like building a business you're going to need to be faster at, ringing the cash register. You're going to be selling some service, which means probably can sell it day 15 instead of needing to build technology for 2 years. So there's a bunch of benefits there. But what's difficult about it? If you think about the businesses that they would have to create if a founder that was otherwise going to think about software, maybe they're an engineer or a product person. Let's specifically talk about that. If an engineer or product person is like, actually, now I agree with you. I have a great, storefront concept. I want to do some sort of retail services business. What warnings would you give them while still encouraging them and say, here's what's going to be harder for you than building a SaaS company? Yeah. By no means is building a retail business easy. Yeah. It's a tough job, and it's why the folks that do it
should be celebrated. I would say to someone, particularly someone that's more product and engineering focused, is there is a really big people component to the job. People management, but also empathy, not just for your customers, but also for the labor force that you'll likely employ in your brick and mortar services or brick and mortar business. And I would say not to underestimate the amount of thought and effort it requires to.
If we get like even more specific about that, is what you're saying that like because you're going after not the knowledge worker class and you might not have pre-existing understanding of the needs, the wants, the pay, the lifestyles of the labor force you're employing, like you might not expect the challenges that come from that. Is that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a lot of people at once, right? Like I think if you're building a software startup and you raise your pre-seed round, you have a little bit of growth and development over the course of 6 months to a year with like a lean team of 3, and you're really learning how you manage, and then you grow your team from 3 to 20, and you start to do that, right? And you learn all along the way. When you're operating a brick and mortar concept, it takes, 12 to 20 people to facilitate the concept. And so overnight, you're a manager of 12 to 20 people. And those 12 to 20 people are a really differentiated workforce than if you came from a software engineering background or even a finance background where you were working at a large firm. It's a very different setting. And so
the truth is, it's just stickier, right? It's just, it's not just, to your point, more problems. If we're being honest, it's like real people problems that like, founders you and I know might not have like the levels of empathy required, right? And some of them can hire against that, right? Instead of having to manage it themselves, if they have the capital. But is that the truth? Is it's like you have to have, to your point, it's empathy, but like a deep sense of, care. And maybe I separate that from empathy in that moment.
Totally. And I think, by the way, that's the beautiful part of brick and mortar, is you are you're just so directly impacting society in so many different ways.
Right.
Like you actually, if you're operating that brick and mortar, you get to decide what does the future look like for an entirely different labor force that you otherwise wouldn't have exposure to, or otherwise wouldn't be able to impact the livelihoods of unless you were in politics.
Right.
And so it's just like being in the brick and mortar space is empowering in so many ways of, okay, I'm touching the people who come and experience my product, and I'm like part of their morning routine. I'm part of their daily routine, their monthly routine. And then I'm also directly impacting the folks that I choose to employ in here, and how I set the culture and benefits and all of that. Just, it goes so much further. It's so gratifying. It's such a gratifying piece of work.
Okay, awesome. First course. Let's head to the second one.
Let's do it. Okay.
All right. Neha, course 2.
Course 2.
This one we like to call mutual founder therapy. We're getting to all the sticky stuff, or some of the sticky stuff that goes, into the founder journey, and we have some food in front of us too.
Sticky food, actually.
Sticky food, exactly,
so
exactly.
Appropriate.
On theme. Let me ask you this question: when you think about your founder journey and the thing that we should have mutual therapy on, what comes to mind for you of an inflection point, a change, a thing in that path that you think others might really dig learning from both of us on?
I would say probably the building of a sales muscle.
Mm-hmm. Which a lot of people say is like the essential part of being a founder.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think, fortunately, I was so naive before going into becoming a founder that I didn't read that. Otherwise, it might have deterred me. Because I would say before being a founder, I never thought of myself as having a sales muscle.
What were you doing before?
I was a management consultant.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
So I worked.
You had a selling muscle of a kind, but not like a closing muscle. Is that a way to think about it?
No, I was an analyst at Bain. I was building decks. I wasn't selling the
you weren't,
clients. No, I mean, obviously we did a lot of client services and client work, but it's a very different. It's just more like client services,
because you're leading almost with the product deliverable in those conversations.
You're explaining, you're educating, you're getting buy-in, but you're not telling someone they should do something they've never done before, or buy something that they've never
swipe a card
seen before. Yeah. I definitely, I think back, building Glowbar, there was definitely an element of sales involved. And then really in building Bonside is where I felt it the most. So when I think back to, it's like sales, networking, it's all of that. now it's something that's so comfortable to me and so innate. But in launching our first deal, so up until our first deal, we had spent some time building out this like beautiful platform that we wanted folks to transact on. It was only going to be accredited investors, so we wanted the experience to be really great. And while we were building that, I was meeting with folks that could be the first few folks on the platform. And by the time the platform was ready, I had, I think, like a list of like 80 people I was going to email. And they had at some point said, hey, once you have your first deal live, let me know.
Almost like a verbal letter of intent.
Yeah, exactly. So I emailed those 80 people and I'm like, the platform's ready. Like, we're going to have our first deal come to market next week. And of those 80 people, I think like half of them signed up. First stream of disappointment. I was like, what about the other 40? We had talked about this. Like, I thought they were going to do it. So 40 of them sign up. And then I'm like, okay, that's fine. 40's good. You know, the minimum check size, 10K. They've, you know, maybe someone will do 25, 50 and it'll be fine. And we launch our first deal. And, you know, we're launching, it's an incredible business was our first deal. A very hot space, incredible margins, hasn't taken outside funding yet, just a dream of a business. But, you know, it's a net new asset class, the repeatable revenue agreement, that's never existed before. And we are asking people to write not a small amount of capital into this deal. And so I like build like beautiful like materials around it and I put it on the platform and I'm like, I send an email and I'm like, the first deal is now live, like get it while it's hot. Crickets. Like no one is moving.
Not even a reply.
No, not even like, I think like one person was like, nice site.
Not even no, just nice site.
Yeah, like no one's replying. I'm like, is it working? Did my email go through? And that was the beginning of like, oh, if you're going to be a founder, you got to sell what you're building because there's a reason it doesn't exist already. And so you need to convince people that it should exist and help them see the world the way you see the world and get them bought in on that.
Such a great point. And I love this story. You know, I often find this struggle myself as a founder, not only in the sales motion, literally, but I think the thing that you're also saying that, you know, we should be explicit about is also selling the vision, obviously, to investors, selling when you're closing a candidate that you really want on your team. And all of this for a lot of founders actually does come unnaturally. And I will say it's often people who are either immigrants or come from immigrant families or families with, you know, not the same sense of access to capital that struggle to ring the cash register in the same aggressive way as others do. And there's an aggression to ringing the cash register to this phone call thing that you're talking about, especially. You know, it's interesting. One of the funny things as well about your part of that journey is the initial yeses were kind of like a lot of founders go through this letter of intent thing as well, where like they go, oh, I've got 80 LOIs. And I always tell people who say that to me, I go, that's equivalent to nothing. And if there are investors who credit you on your LOIs, they should be telling you, no, you need to ring the cash register on some of those. Get a pre-order. A letter of intent means nothing. It's not a binding thing. You got to get someone to actually give you the money. And until then, you have next to nothing. You have customer research. Is essentially all you have. But a lot of founders, it takes the pain, I guess, right? Of like, oh, I needed something to happen and it didn't. To force it. Yeah,
it's like you have to be pushed up against a corner and be like, okay, I have no other choice. Like I have to do it. And then if it's something that you're not comfortable with doing, it takes that to you're forced to become comfortable with it. You have no other option.
So there are two things that are interesting about that, and I'll start picking at the food while we talk about this.
Great.
So we've got the spring rolls, we've got the I think this is the chicken dumplings, and then pork bao up for grabs here.
All fresh, nothing fried.
Fantastic. Yeah, exactly. We had a very interesting experience over the food hall. But one of the notions that I found, you know, again, there are two things that I think are interesting here. The first is this idea of the phone call.
Yep.
And when you said that, the first thing that came to mind for me is how often I tell my team, we'll be in the office, someone will come to me and be like, oh, a client hasn't said anything to me in a while, and we have a business where like, that's weird. Or maybe there's some sort of complaint coming through Slack. And I go, have you called the person? And they go, oh yeah, I'll call them tomorrow. And I go, well, what about right now? Why don't you just like walk over and call the person right now and have a conversation and break whatever ice is going to, by the way, probably make you not do it tomorrow anyway. And turn it into a task that you won't do until next week.
Totally.
And this whole idea, you know, founders, I think, begin to realize what a shortcut that is. It's not that there's, you tell me what you think here, but I don't think we're like novel in our skill set. We're not better at phone calls than anybody else. We're just willing to be on the phone, receive the rejection, and take the action right away.
There's no fear.
There's no fear. Or if there's fear, it's that like, if we don't do the phone call, what's going to happen instead? What else for you became the thing that allowed you to be good at picking up the phone?
I think it's almost when you can Like when it didn't pan out, being like, oh, that wasn't so bad. I think about it like, when you're a little kid and you have to go ask someone for an autograph and your parents are like, go ask them. And you're like, no, like I'm like terrified. And then like, the first time you go and ask someone, and even if they say no, you're like, okay. But it's in your head. You like built this like, what if they say no? Right. And it's like, it's that, I think that like that whole, what if they say no? I don't think I've asked myself that question in 2 years. Like I'm just like, okay, then that's on them. Like then move on to the next, do it again. But like this, removing that fear of the word no and just assuming that like no isn't an answer, I think is the unlock there for sure.
Two things that come to mind for me when you say that. The first is like how much I credit like my parents, both of them. My parents were divorced at a young age, which is not the point of the story, but both of them separately would like make me do things like go, talk to the cashier or whatever. Yeah, exactly. And that's such a good muscle in hindsight that
totally.
like, and it didn't, I wasn't ever good at it until much later in my life, I think. So it's not like that immediately manifested, but I definitely now think that it helped me eventually when I needed to bring that skill up. It was something in my brain.
For sure.
But the second part of that, when you think about the idea of no, it's also like no means I just need to go do something else. So like if I lose a customer, I need another customer. I got to know from that one, I just need to find another one. Or a candidate, that we're trying to close says no, I need another candidate, or I need to convince them differently. A no is a path to something for founders, I think, right? Because we're not going to give up after the no.
Totally.
And like, this is maybe something that when you're an employee, you do have a little bit less agency in like deciding what comes next. But because a founder probably always goes, I will have to figure out something next. There's not going to be nothing after this. So I must do something. Let me get the no so I can move on.
I can move on. Totally.
It's really interesting.
I always the thing that I firmly believe is just like every problem is solvable. It might not be solved the way you want it to be solved. It might not be the solve that you were thinking, but there's a solve. And so just keep solving problems. Like just keep going through it. You can work through it. You can figure out a different answer to anything.
No, so but think about it in the context of what you guys are building. When it comes to finding investors that essentially, to shortcut, how Bonside works. These investors are people who you're bringing on and saying, hey, we're investing in these brick and mortar services businesses. And we do it through a revenue financing agreement. So you should give us capital. We'll invest in these businesses. Do they get to choose which businesses they come along with you on, or is it more like a fund?
So there's two different ways that you can invest in a Bonside business. One is we have two vehicles. One is the fund, where folks will commit to the fund up front. And then we allocate it on a deal-by-deal basis. We call the capital as it's needed, and then we disperse their monthly payouts. And that has a higher minimum. So it's generally going to be more family offices, ultra-high net worth individuals, folks like that. And then we have our marketplace, which is for any accredited investor with a minimum check size of $15K. And that's where you can join the platform. You can participate in 0 deals. You can participate in deal by deal allocation.
And so they start to get cash from these businesses as revenue comes in immediately?
Yes,
or
month one.
Month one.
Yeah. So you wire on June 29th. Your first payout will be July 1st, and the revenue rate will be June 29th to July 1st.
So they basically immediately begin to participate as an owner of that business. That's fantastic. Now, what's interesting about not getting a sale from them, though, right, is like that's very, you're not selling something soft, right? Like it's a business. What was, key in terms of, you said that one of the first no's was almost like it didn't hit, right? Like there was a vibe that wasn't there on the page that you sent to that first batch of investors. What about that? Like less explicitly the sales motion that you began to grow into, but what did you realize from a visibility standpoint, a selling vision standpoint for a business had to be different for those investors to get excited?
We never changed a thing. So
really,
we didn't change a thing. And I said to you earlier, our last deal closed in 9 hours without us doing the stuff. And so the thing that we realized was we are bringing this whole concept of getting monthly payouts as an investor. If I say to you monthly payouts, two seemingly very simple words, they mean nothing to you.
Right.
So there's no existing culture around what we're doing, no existing education, comfort, trust, security around getting monthly payouts.
Right.
And so it was instead like, how can I build that awareness for you? How can I build that education for you? And it was so important that we picked up the phone and called because there wasn't any set of materials that we could put in front of you that
would. Is it the same thing that just happened a few seconds ago with me going to you? So they get paid immediately. Like that, is it the same aha moment that people needed? And they weren't getting it if you wrote it down. Basically,
Sorry, that was one of many. There's a bunch of ahas.
Right.
It's like, wait, so I get monthly payouts immediately? Wait, so percentage of sales. So if they have a really big month, like I then get a bigger payout. Okay. And they already have revenue. It's like they're it's like it's too good to be true type of thing.
And does the insight today sound something like you still can't write it down though? It always has to be a call.
The first time you need a phone call. After that, you can act on your own. Because also by the time the next deal came around, people had gotten monthly payouts. And they're like, this is really cool. I want to keep collecting monthly payouts. And so they were totally bought in. We don't have to get on the phone with them. And then we were still getting on the phone with people that were first time users. And then as late as our last few deals, there's people transacting that we've never spoken with on the phone before. I always say we're doing two things. One, we're building a brand around the repeatable revenue agreement in this asset class. And we're also building a brand around Bonside. And I think there's a lot of companies where the products that they're offering doesn't need brand. If you're, starting a deodorant company, you don't need to be the PR for deodorant. You just need to be the PR for your brand.
Right.
We need to be the PR for our asset class and for our brand.
Right.
I don't know that it'll always take a phone call because as you build brand and awareness, and hopefully we're doing that and accomplishing that with every deal.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting to think about founders who go through this journey of essentially like, for agency as an example, as a founder of a net new concept, right? Because to your point, for your customer and for your investor, this is a new asset class. For agency, we're talent representation model for knowledge workers. That's the first time that's happening in knowledge work.
Mm-hmm.
You begin to realize that you can't play the tricks you see other founders play. Like it's not that I can just make a fancy social media ad for my pots and pans startup.
Yep.
That startup probably won't work anyway, but like, I shouldn't say that. There's a founder who actually I know who has a pots and pans startup. But whatever.
I have a pot and pan from a pot and pan startup. No, mine's Our Place.
I don't know if I've seen that one.
It's great. Great pan. Highly recommend.
So in the context of like seeing companies that can just put out a social ad and it's their brand, and it's the bright colors and the neon, a lot of founders are going to go through this motion of like saying, okay, I just need to create some more advertising. But then at some point, there's this realization of, oh, I need to educate.
Yep.
I need to tell vision. And how do I do that? How did you, other than the transaction, right? Because that's one part of it. But I can hear in what you're talking about that it wasn't just that moment. It's this other realization that there's this asset class and I've got to be the spokesperson for this thing. And that's a very different thing than deciding to start the company and solve this problem for brick and mortar services. You're now saying, I have to essentially create out of nothing a 0-1 motion that people won't understand. And every phone call I make is going to be net new, trying to convince them that the world should work slightly differently. When you realized that was a job that you had to do, how did you feel? And how did you start?
I was thrilled. I mean, at this point, I'd crossed like that sales hurdle. And so my job is to tell everyone why the world should exist this way. One, I just so fundamentally to my core believe it needs to exist this way. Like the solution for Bonside came out of me building a business through a pandemic and feeling like I needed, like it was born out of that. And then the more I marinated on it, I'm seeing investors and this like rising class of investors and people saying like, I don't know where to put my capital. I don't want to put in the stock market anymore. You're seeing like angel investors getting a little bit of a bad rap of like, hey, don't do angel investing unless you're really serious about it because you're going to lose a lot of your capital. You're seeing founders saying like, I don't want to dilute myself anymore. I'm over the glitz. Like I'm seeing all of these macro trends happen. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the intersection of all of that.
And did you solve it for you?
Yeah.
In the pandemic? How?
I did a deal with an individual and got financing this way.
Got it.
And that's what made me feel confident of, I can go build a business model around this.
Right.
So all of that is to say, in realizing like, hey, it's going to my job is going to be to like help people see the world this way and help the folks that I interact see it this way. It was one, I felt great about that. I was like, yeah, I'm ready to do that. Like I could have this conversation all day long. And then two, what did I do to do it? I took every single meeting. I take every meeting. I speak to everyone. I'm like, my job is to meet every single person and tell them my perspective on brick and mortar and tell them why. It
doesn't matter if they're a customer today. It matters that like you are putting in the world that this concept exists and people should know about it.
It doesn't even matter if they are a potential customer or not. Like I will meet with, if you're an investment banker, I'll meet with you. I'll tell you about this. If you go tell one other person, our product, because it has investors and businesses, is related. Everyone has a reason to know about our product. And so all I do is talk to people and tell them about Bonside. And I'm like, that to me is better than any billboard that I can put up if I just spend all of my time talking about Bonside.
Yeah. So the last topic, this is an interesting one because I do this to you, or I've done this to you every time we've talked about Bonside, which is I immediately go to two other startups and other startups I know in revenue-based financing. I immediately, my brain goes, I know CapTrace, I know Pipe, I know Clear, and I start to make comparisons, which is helpful for you because it makes me understand your business well. I think that's something that when we first started talking about the business, it's the reason I feel native to understanding why so much of what your business is doing is so interesting.
Yeah.
I also understand the mechanics of it probably better than others because of the comparison there that I have in my brain.
Yeah.
But obviously I'm imposing things that you don't necessarily want in terms of, well, this is how they're different. This is how they're risky. Also, one of them might be going through some other weird trend that is unrelated to the business model that you don't want to be associated with. As a founder who has such close analogies, because, free agency as an example doesn't really, I'm curious what that does to your founder psychology in general. I'm curious how you feel in the moment when it happens. Walk us through as a founder who is in a business where there's adjacencies people will default to, regardless of whether you bring them up. What does that do for you or not do for you?
When I think about all the other players in the space, I don't. That's unless I'm in a conversation, I never go to their websites. I never think about what they're doing. I personally just so know how our solution needs to come to market. It doesn't matter what they're doing. And even if I tried to do what they're doing, it wouldn't be authentic to us. And so it probably wouldn't resonate. And so I can never be the Burger King to McDonald's. I'll never build that business. There are people that are really damn good at that. That's not me.
Is it helpful as an analogy? Because even for me, when I bring it up, the first way I'll give some inside baseball into our connection. The first way I interacted with the concept of Bonside was we're advising a client, but also a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And he sends me the landing page and says, this is a company I'm about to talk to. What do you think?
Yeah.
And I go, oh, this is Pipe for brick and mortar, but in a positive way. I was like, oh, fascinating. Here are the questions I would ask this person. Here's what I think about the concept.
Totally.
Do you like when it helps? Do you still fear though when it helps? You still would prefer people didn't think about it? I'm curious, is it a good thing sometimes?
Yeah, it's, I'm unfazed by it. I don't know that it's a good thing. I don't know that it's a bad thing. I think I've now just developed, I honestly feel like I have 40 talk tracks in me. Mm-hmm. And it's all right, if you're going to come in with Pipe for brick and mortar, okay, this is how I'm going to structure the conversation, right? And it's
it's a shortcut that you're going to try to navigate with.
Exactly. And so if you come in with nothing, I'm okay, then I'm going to give you, we're going to start pie in the sky. If you come in with an anchor, okay, great. We're going to start from that anchor and I'm going to work you back to the pie in the sky. So it's just, to me, it's just a starting point. And it doesn't bother me. You could come in and be your business sucks. I'm okay, great. This is the starting point. We're going to work from there. So yeah, that's kind of how I think about that.
That's great. Let's move to the third course.
Okay, let's do it.
So third course of Three Course Founders. And what I always like to do is talk to some of your founder friends and get them to tell me a little about you in the background and use that to fuel some questions that will be interesting about you again as founder. And let's start with a softball, but a really interesting one. Two different people said that if you were to start a different venture-backed company today, the thing that they think you should start, they both said a Bollywood media empire. First of all,
they both said that.
Two of them said that. So that is very...
I love my friends.
No one else has had the same answer from two different contexts, first of all. And this one's so not what I would think of as a venture-backable company. But why are they saying that? Obviously, you're a fan. But tell us more. Give us the insight into why that's what came out for them.
Oh, I love that so much. I am a Bollywood fanatic. My whole life wanted to be a Bollywood actress. Never did anything about it. Didn't go to acting school. Didn't do anything.
A lot of life ahead of you.
But my college entrance essay to Northwestern was about obviously it was not about actually wanting to be a Bollywood actress because they wouldn't have admitted me otherwise. I joke, I'm I think I was the Elle Woods applicant at Northwestern. I think they're that's weird. All right, let's try it out. But I literally wrote about my obsession with Bollywood and I just performance is something that I've always been obsessed with. I love performance.
So here's what I actually think. So that's the softball part of the question. The more interesting part that gets into who you are, one of the things I actually ask every candidate who even interviews for a job at Free Agency, but I think is also extraordinarily true of founders, is that our obsessions drive who we are as operators. So when I ask this of candidates, what I want to know is that they have an obsession at all, because the obsessive nature of someone means that they can work with me. And if they don't have an obsessive nature, I know they won't be caring as much about the problems, the people, the process. Do you find either just from the fact that you have obsessions, an obsession, or in particular this one of Bollywood, how has that influenced your operating style?
Oh, we say this thing at our company. Someone on our team actually thought of it. I said it in a far more verbose way, and he was like, "Well, it's kind of like a swan." He's like, "It's not really like a duck; it's a swan. It's like you want people to perceive you to be like things are really put together. You're really calm. You want to be affiliated with that, and then underneath, you're like
elevated.
Keep that guy chin up. But you're really like you're kind of like
right, scurrying.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's very much how I operate. I mean, any conversation I go into, I have spent like 10 to 15 minutes building a talk track into thinking exactly how I want to approach the conversation. But when I show up on the call, I'm not reading the script and all of that. Like, it's like, okay, hi, it's so nice to meet you. And it's like, just like code switch. It all comes down to like performance. I actually said this to our mutual friend too. I think it's like it's the core of everything. Like being a performer is not only engaging your audience, but it's deeper than that because you actually have to do something that engages your audience. And in order to do that, you have to be really thoughtful in that craft. You have to be really diligent about it. It's also real. And like a beautiful performance is so much more than just that moment.
Right. Right.
So I just like, that's how I think about operating a business is like, we are all part of this. We're all putting on a performance. We're all the cast and crew, and we're all the main actors and supporting actors, and our audience are our customers, investors, people we interact with. If I'm not, being a Bollywood actress, like being a founder is the next best thing to me. I'm like, yeah, this is our stage. Like
we get to decide what it looks and feels like.
Totally.
One of the values at Phragency, we both have values that are long in description and then we unify them a little bit. So one of them is presentation matters, and it's, the hashtag is stay flossy. And one of the things is like, there are a lot of people who can't value that. I've hired people and let them go or had them, leave the business who can't appreciate, it requires more effort. Mm-hmm. And so they don't feel that reward because they don't think that value is important, or they think like, oh, we should actually be sloppier and faster instead. And, I always want to be faster. So I'm aligned on that part. But when you think about people who don't appreciate presentation the same way you do, or put togetherness and discipline around saying, this is a performance. And so it matters how you show up to one of our investors or customers or to a meeting. Do you think those people can work at Bonside if they have other qualities, or do you think it's a deal breaker?
If there's any part of their role that's client facing, it's a deal breaker.
You need that person to care. And if they don't show up correctly to somebody else, that's the deal breaker for you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think about that when I'm interviewing for someone. Like when I think about fit, I'm like, did you make an effort to be here?
But it's funny because the person that is our mutual friend that is on your team is not client facing. I'm sure you can put him in front of clients any day of the week.
Yeah.
But that's not his core job, and yet he cares about presentation. So clearly, you'll even give a lot of credit to people who care about the user experience, the visual. Oh, yeah. That mentality matters.
Yeah, I think it's to me, it's a sign of respect.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Respect people's time, energy, effort. The fact they're listening to you at all in the first place is a privilege.
Yeah.
I say that all the time to people. People don't deserve, or you don't deserve people's attention by default.
Yeah.
You have to earn it.
Totally.
So, moving on from Bollywood as one of the things, the other interesting thing that
we talked about that.
It's fantastic. The fact that two people said it is perfect. Another thing that I think is a theme coming from a few of the things that people said about you, resolves as, and one person said it specifically, recruiting top talent from great companies. Again, even our mutual friend is an example of this, but in general, that's something that you do. In the form of another founder talking about your ability to kind of sell or put a presentation forward. But let's talk about it in the form of recruiting top talent, right? Obviously, some of that's related to this presentation topic and you showing up well, but there must be something else that's going on in, that moment. When you think about when you've been proudest of how the company is hired, why are people giving you credit for that? Not only the people talking about that, admiring you from the outside, but the admiration from the inside of the people who accepted offers. What's happening? Why are you good at that?
Yeah, that's kind of them to say. I think my hiring process is I'm like really getting to know you as a person, mm-hmm. and I will spend as much time as I need to really understand you. And if I think you are right for the role, then the conversations that we're having start to feel really if I think you're right for the role, that means I've gleaned something about you that I think makes you a really great fit for this role. And chances are it's probably something that you equally are excited by too, because it was loud enough for me to be able to glean that from a series of conversations. So like if I'm interviewing you for a sales role and I get the sense that, you really like, you like light up a room when you walk in and you're really energetic and upbeat, then I'm going to talk to you about that. I'm going to say like, you're going to light up that room when you're in there. And
you're going to sell me to me as a way to sell me to you. Almost.
Yeah, but it's not calculated. I'm not like, oh, I'm going to sell him on him and it's going to sell him on me.
It's not a psychology trick you're trying to pull, but it is interesting that it's almost what you're doing is you are selling them to them, even though you're trying to sell them on you.
Yeah. I mean, I can't help it. Like I'm just so excited.
Right.
And I'm like, you're going to be so good for this.
It's so interesting that you say that. It's almost like what you're identifying is the nickname that they've now created in your head. I often talk about this when we're advising our clients and interviews. Like you want to leave behind a nickname. You want to leave behind a feeling. You want to leave behind, I always tell the same story around this. When we were first interviewing for candidates for agency, we were interviewing this person who was the GM for New York Postmates. And she was telling us a lot of anecdotes and stories about Postmates. And obviously we could relate to them as people who like are in New York and order food. And so me and my co-founder for the several weeks afterwards, we were considering this candidate. We would just go, Postmates lady. And every candidate recall is such an important part of being hired that like the nickname that because no one remembers anyone's name. Yeah. The nickname that someone occupies is really important. Yeah. This is almost like you're revealing the nickname to the person, right? Like it's as if we went to that person and goes, oh, we love your Postmates anecdotes. Tell us more. And this is why they resonate for us. You're revealing the space they now occupy in your brain.
Yeah, totally. 100%. And again, like only because I just have so much conviction behind them being that person for it that I'm like, I want you to see what I see of, I want you to get, I'm so excited. I want you to get excited. And if you can't get excited about it, then that's a good thing.
It's almost like you're validating that you're even right. That's interesting.
Exactly.
Because it's so funny. I actually think this is something that I've discovered. I wonder what you think about it. There is often a disconnect behind what you might identify in someone and what actually is true, that an interview is just not good. I don't think this is like a problem that can be solved today of like an interview won't suss that out sometimes.
Totally. If I really want someone, it's because I'm like,
feeling it too.
I'm feeling like chemistry.
Totally.
And if I'm not feeling chemistry and I still want you, like I've lost that before for sure.
What's like an interesting reflection if you look back on like something someone you did lose and you go, I could have won that person. I could have hired that person if I presented differently. What's like a lesson that you've self-reflected on from hiring?
It's been negotiations.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's like, it's almost like a good challenge for me of like, am I willing to negotiate up for this person?
And it's explicitly on the idea that like you think the number should have moved up in hindsight.
No, I didn't. Right. So it's like if you're negotiating, like so if I think about
like if you self-reflect on that, you go, I made the right choice.
Yes. Honestly, it's like every time it's because they weren't the right person for the role. They weren't perfect for the role.
And that came up somehow towards the end.
Yeah. Or, maybe they were looking at another role where it was perfect for them, or I wasn't willing to negotiate on offer because I was like, but you're not actually perfect for this role. So I don't know why you would get that offer.
It's interesting that you say it that way. It's almost like when it's adjacent and, we as founders or hirers or hiring managers in general are getting a little bit opportunistic. That's a dangerous spot to be in. Yeah. Because there might be a better role for them somewhere else. Yeah. And that's like a weird game to be playing where you're like, if this works, is a really challenging place to hire someone from. The phrase, if this works, it'll be great, is like not a great starting point.
Totally.
You want to kind of be like, I'm confident this will work. And if it works, here's what will happen. But not just like, if this works. Yeah. Exactly. It has to be what, I guess, like a 80% bet, not a 40% bet.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And that's definitely where I think like when you're in the beginning days of starting a company, you're like, I'm talking like pre-seed, you're just like, you're kind of like, who wants to come? Who wants to do this with me? And that's where
it's true for a long time. I'd say like until Series D, I talked to so many founders about it, and they're obviously hype companies that just like become the press darlings in tech. The problem becomes solved for them. But I talk to founders who say the idea of hiring great people other than your execs is folly. You hire people who are willing to come. They might be great, and that's your job to find out who is. Yeah. But you're not going to hire the people who already have it on the resume, have the proof points, have the credentials. Totally. You have to find them. Totally. You have to, discover them.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. This is an interesting one. I asked some of your founder friends about a business muscle of yours that they wish they could steal, and someone said your ability to craft and stick with routines. You experiment with rituals, but then when you find one that works, you prioritize doing it every day. Do you also find this to be true about yourself, and where does it come from?
Yeah, I do. They're probably referring to my extremely regimented morning routine.
What is your morning routine? Can we ask?
I wake up at 6:30 and I read a piece of a piece of nonfiction that I like. So right now I'm reading Rick Rubin's The Creative Act.
It's so funny that came up at our business yesterday.
It is, I think I'll read it for the rest of my life. I think I'm just going to keep rereading it. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So I read for like 20 minutes. Then so that's like 6:30 to 6:50 while I drink coffee. 6:50 to 7, I will write out like priorities for the day, like what I need, like just work planning, maybe skim inbox. 7 to 7:50 is my workout. And then 7:50, and this is, by the way, why I need a gym in the building, because I don't have time for commute to and from a gym. So 7 to 7:50 is my workout. And then 7:50.
She's on the hunt for an apartment, folks.
Yeah, you got any leads? 7:50 to 8:30, get ready and leave and go to the office.
For you, is it like if you don't start that way, you're going to be frazzled during the day?
The days are so unpredictable.
Right.
And running a business is like you're feeling insecure a lot. You're feeling like, are you making the right choices? Are you making the right decisions? Are you like you're just, your mind is constantly spinning, and that's a difficult place to be in. And I feel like the morning is like, I don't have to make any decisions. I'm confident in my choices. I know they are positive choices. And it's just like good job for myself. And then it's like, okay, go into the chaos.
Well, I definitely feel, I always tell people this, something I now appreciate in hindsight about my childhood and my mom, when she would come home from work, and she's a physician and infectious disease doctor, and she'd call and she'd be like going to get fast food for us, at the end of the day. And she'd be like, do you want Burger King or Taco Bell or something like that? And I'd always go, whatever you want. And she'd be like, no, you pick. And she'd just be like, I don't want to make this choice right now. And this whole idea of choice fatigue, which the recent science has come out and said choice fatigue might not be a real psychological phenomenon. I don't know, but like, that's definitely what she was feeling.
Yeah.
And, as I've become a founder, now even a second time, I definitely have this idea, and it sounds like this is somewhat what routine gives, is anything pre-baked means I have to make less of a choice, because during the day I will have to make choices. People are going to walk up to me at the desk every 20 minutes and force me to make some very big decision for a client, for them, or they have a problem, from a personnel standpoint that's going to require me to make big choices. And so the more I can minimize some of them, I'm not going to get, Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs crazy and just wear a turtleneck every day. But there is a lot of that, I think, to being a founder, of minimizing at least some of the things that are otherwise going to force you to pick, so that you can, only have so many decisions you make in a day.
Totally. I agree with that. Did you say that there's a study that came out that said choice fatigue isn't a thing?
Yeah, or it's not. I believe that is what the study is positing, and that like the whole concept of like at the end of the day, if you've made a lot of choices, you can't continue to make. It might be saying you can continue to make good choices. So maybe the effort is still like feels like a lot at the end of the day. But I think the study did come out and say you don't make worse. You don't make them worse.
Okay, well that's comforting for when we are making the choices.
Yeah, exactly.
I 100%. I mean, my husband will agree that I'm just like, I'm done with choices by the time I come home. Even what's so funny is so I'm like slowly moving to New York, and I've been subletting. And so I brought with me like a capsule wardrobe essentially. Mm-hmm. So I have like, I think 30 articles of clothing here with me. And it's by the way, my favorite 30 pieces of clothing. So I'm very happy with the selection I have. And every day, it's just like, it takes me 20 seconds to get dressed, because I'm just staring at 30 pieces and I'm like, all right, and it's like my own little uniform, and it's my work uniform. Like I don't wear it on the weekends, and it's just so funny. And I'm like, the power of a uniform.
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know how you feel about it. Like I agree with the concept of it, but I don't like the idea of a singular uniform.
No, I agree.
Yeah. And so like my version of this that I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn who know me, especially from like my childhood and my friends, is that about a year and a half ago, I decided to start setting out my clothes for the next day at night.
I love that.
Because I just felt like this pain, but I don't want to only wear a uniform. Yeah. And so my solution was to say, okay, you're going to make this choice.
Yeah.
begin to make this choice at the end of the day instead of the beginning, because the cost of doing it in the beginning was taking a little too long. My wardrobe is unfortunately a little more expansive than that. I should really minimize and downsize. But like that was my optimization choice. So I totally agree with you there. Last question for you. Is there anything that you want to leave founders with? They've listened to us talk through a couple different topics. Anything we didn't cover that you would say is your biggest lesson for someone about to go through the journey, going through the journey now from where you've been?
Don't underestimate the power of connecting with people. I think like my favorite quote in the world is anonymous, which is, I think, the signs of a fake quote. But this is my high school yearbook quote. It was connect with the world and make people feel. And I think that applies to everyone, no matter what you're doing, founder or not. Just like connect with the world, make people feel. It's just a way more gratifying way to live.
Make people feel. I like that
Make
part
people
of it.
feel.
That's that. Let's all live by that one. Yeah, thanks so much for this. This has been a lot of fun. 3 Course Founders, 3 meals, 3 topics.
This is awesome. This was so well thought out. It was so fun.
Awesome. Where should people find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Neha Gov, Nehagov, LinkedIn, Neha Govindraj, and yeah, bonside.com. Bonside.com.
Bonside.com. Check it out.
Amazing.
We did it. Nice.
Woohoo! Like, what the hell happened today? Like, I had a terrible day.
Yeah.